Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for your patience, and thank you for coming this evening. We know it's pretty extreme conditions. So as a board and as a staff, I'll speak for Dan for just a second, too. It was more difficult to reschedule this meeting than to have everyone come tonight. So thank you. We are all very appreciative. Since 5 p.m. this evening, this Board of Education has been in closed session for purposes of appointment, employment, compensation, discipline, performance, or dismissal of specific employees of the district or legal counsel of the district, litigation, where an action against, affecting, or on behalf of a particular district has been filed or pending before a court or administrative tribunal, the setting of a price for sale or lease of property owned by the district, the sale or purchase of securities, investments, or investment contracts, and finally, the placement of individual students in special education programs or other matters relating to individual students. So with that, a motion to come out of closed session, please. So moved. A second. A motion and a second to come out of closed session. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. I did my thank you, and thank you again. Our mission, to educate students to be self-directed learners, collaborative workers, complex thinkers, quality producers, and community contributors. And with that, I will ask our board secretary for a roll call, please.
Board members present: Mike Yench, Susan Price, Terry Fielden, Jackie Romberg, Kristen Fitzgerald, Donna Wonke, and Susan Crotty.
Thank you. And I will turn our good news over to our superintendent.
Well, we don't have any good news or recognition scheduled for the night. We do have good news, though. I anticipate we'll have students back in school on Wednesday.
Because this is our superintendent of weather. So, W-E-A-T-H-E-R. Next on our agenda is public comment, and as most people that frequent our meetings know, if you're an individual, I don't have any slips for people that wish to speak, but if you're here and you wish to speak, if you're an individual, you have 3 minutes to speak to the board, and if you're representing a group, 5 minutes. So is there anyone here that would like to come forward? Okie doke.
Nothing to say, Ms. Duncan? Are you sure? Okay.
Nice familiar face. And we had asked our student ambassadors, because of the weather conditions, not to come this evening. I had heard that, so we will turn it over to our superintendent for superintendent's staff school report.
Okay, our first update tonight in our reports is the co-curricular update. And since the topic of random mandatory drug testing was raised at last year's annual meeting to review the co-curricular code of conduct, the administration has reviewed and considered whether or not District 203 should institute such a practice. And the review has been led by our Assistant Superintendent for Secondary Education, Bob Ross. After careful consideration of several factors, including research on the topic, potential legal implications, and consideration of the district's own expertise or experience in this matter, I'm not prepared to bring forward a recommendation to the board to adopt such a policy. Instead, at this time, it's my recommendation that the district continue its focus on education and prevention in partnership with the schools and then also our local school agency, community agencies. Memorandum summarizing the work of the administration has been provided for you in board docs. Mr. Ross, anything that you'd like to highlight or add at this time? No. Okay, and then we'd be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Michael?
First of all, thank you for the very thorough memorandum. It covered pretty much everything. The one thing I would like to ask is, have you considered, because this was all in the area of a co-curricular type program, did you guys have any discussions on a total student program? Specifically, though, I understand what the problems are as far as making it mandatory, but either with an opt-in or opt-out program where students or parents, in the case of minors, could opt into a program or parents could opt out as far as this kind of testing goes.
We did have some discussion about that. An immediate advantage to that, Mr. Yench, as you point out, is it wouldn't be limited to just those covered by the co-curricular code, which it would have to be if it were mandatory, right? I don't know what the market would be, the interest level of families. There may well be some. And we have had some discussion about that possibility. What if the district were to brokers, too strong a word, but publicize, look for vendors, help parents to match up with vendors who might be interested in, if I'm understanding your question right, in availing themselves of the ability as a parent to say, I'd like to have my child tested. We have had some discussion about that.
Because the point is, you have two options. If you get away from the co-curricular one, you can have an opt-in or an opt-out program. Obviously, with an opt-in program, still random testing. It's not like you're testing everybody, but parents could obviously opt out of it. But with an opt-in program, we would have a contract with a vendor. The cost to the district would still be random, but you would give. I think you would offer the parents an option, a service where we could offer this, and it would also speak to some of the questions or things that were brought up at that meeting. Like, a student can say, "Hey, wait a second, I could get tested here any second." It gives them an excuse or a reason to not participate in activities they might not want to anyway. So I guess I'm asking, and you said, okay, you looked at it, we may not be ready for it, but the question is it still something we might want to look at as a voluntary thing or something you can voluntarily beg out of?
So if you go to the memorandum that we provided, it wasn't specifically mentioned in that last paragraph, but that's part of what we've talked about when we had that discussion, was to make a first step to partner with the schools, our support services within the schools and other community agencies to better communicate where parents can go for those resources so that they can do that. And then as we continue to move forward and maybe hear from our stakeholders and parents and other individuals on if we need to take a more assertive role in that, then we would begin to look at that.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bob, for this document. I thought you did a really good job summarizing all the different research that you've gone through and the real challenges of trying to come at this issue. Bob and I were both in attendance at the last home and school meeting with all the various representatives from our schools at all levels. And there was still a really strong degree of concern about the issue of drugs. And so I think I really commend your last paragraph about your work to strengthen existing partnerships. I think that you're obviously doing some great work with a lot of existing partners. And whatever we can do to increase the communication and even the efforts at all levels, I think would be something that our community would really respond well to, because I think that it's clearly an issue of concern and continues to be that. And our role as educators in terms of how we work with our community, I think we still have some work to do there. And so I'm happy to see all of your efforts with the community organizations, and I look forward to your continued work and our efforts to communicate that to all our folks.
Thank you very much.
Okay, our next report is a report back to the Board of Education regarding our after-school, which actually before and after-school program providers in District 203. As the board recalls, we introduced a new provider at 2 of our schools this year, and our Deputy Superintendent, Kane Osborne, is going to come forward, provide a review of all of our programs, and talk about next steps moving forward to look at programs for next year.
So you've got the PowerPoint and board docs, but I'll go through it quickly and adding some points along the way, and then we can go ahead and ask some questions. This is what.
Blue, blue?
I'm using teacher voice. Sorry.
I could hear you.
Okay.
I was all fine.
I got the teacher voice. So these are the outcomes just for the presentation. Just a quick overview of the programs from the YMCA and Champions with some operational details of the respective programs and the content. I couldn't possibly include all the content that they include in their programs or that they've provided us, but just some samples. a summary of some parent feedback from a survey that we gave, and additional steps we're going to take this year and looking forward to the next years based on feedback and visiting the sites and talking with the principals and the vendors themselves. So the YMCA is a longstanding operator of programs before and after school. You can see here they operate before school just at Scott and Maplebrook, and actually that'll be at Scott starting this month as the enrollment at Maplebrook's gone to a certain level that it's not sustainable, but we have been able through working with Ms. Ryan to have those students who still want to continue to go to the Scott program in the morning, and we already have transportation available that was already in place for them to take over to Maplebrook to be in time to start school there. After school programming by the YMCA takes place at those 9 schools that you see there. And overall, there are approximately 250 kids currently being served by these programs, mostly after school. The number does fluctuate as some families will pull their kids out for various reasons, or kids will join during the year for various reasons. This is just so you know the tuition for the programming that's involved with the YMCA. This is standard information that goes to families for what they have to pay. The YMCA does have scholarships available or reduced tuition, and my understanding is they keep their ears open, and also our school staff, as appropriate, if they know that a family who's in the program is having trouble, will communicate with the Y staff regarding that. The highlights of their programming, and you can see how it's scheduled on the next slide, are the things that you see here. New this year is the Kids Lit program. It's a literacy program. It's research-based, and physical activity is part of Everyday's program, often to start the after-school activity in the Safe and Sound. And this is just what a typical schedule looks like. So if your child were in this program, this is what they would go through in a typical week at one of the Safe and Sound programs. And just some highlights from this year, because there's something different and special that the programs try to undertake each year, actually in different parts of the year. So this year so far, they did work to create holiday cards, and then those holiday cards were shared at senior citizens' homes and other organizations in the community. And over the holidays, or right before the holidays, they did have dinner for families who are struggling financially at the Scott program, which is I think it's the largest of the YMCA Safe and Sound programs. And the Y was able to provide gifts for families in need in that program. Champions is the other vendor that started this year with us, and they operate after-school programming at Beebe and Ranchview. They have approximately 50 kids in the 2 programs, with the Ranchview program being slightly larger. Tuition there, and this is a change. I apologize from the original. I had the original amount wrong. This is the correct amount on here. It's $360 a month and $90 a week, and Champions does offer a weekly payment option. Champions, too, communicates with our school staff in case there's a family in need who might need a reduction in tuition if it's inquired upon by our staff or by the family. These are the programs that they offer. You can see similarities with the Y program. The Champions program, I'll note, is keen on the interest-based activities where the child chooses which station of activity they're going to go to. So it's not as scheduled out that they all go and move around at stations, but the child can choose which station to go to, with some exceptions when they're doing physical group activities and things like that. And this is what a typical week looks like. The Champions program does have a defined curriculum that's theme-based, and one of the big themes for them has been community connections. Highlights for their programming in the first year as they're starting to make connections was learning about the community and nutrition with the community food drive. And also there was an opportunity at Beebe, I believe, where the local Girl Scout troop was getting ready to have someone come in and do science demonstrations, and Champions actually partnered with them so that the kids got to see it together. They did some learning together, and they pooled resources on that event. We did give what I call a non-scientific survey, and we got in the hands of the parent of every child in these programs, both the Y and Champions, the link to an online survey to take. We did get 103 responses back, and they focused on demographic questions, operational questions, experience that the families had had, and gave some comments. I call it non-scientific because, as Mr. Waringa would tell you, for any given school, the N was so small that you wouldn't get anything statistically valid out of it. But we did get 103 responses overall, and that was useful. There weren't any substantial differences in answers that were distinguishable by provider. It varied across the schools, but those ends were very small. But overall, in the aggregate, just so you know what the programming looks like for the families who are using it, 82% are using it for just after school, 11 are enrolled in both, and 7% just before school. 98% of the respondents' primary reason for enrollment is due to work obligations and an inability to be available at home for child care during specific hours. I think that's important to recognize what the family's needs are in using this service. We asked the parents to identify the top 5 factors related to successful after-school program experience, what was that they would identify. And these are the 5 factors that you see up on the screen right now. And the quality of staff, I'll just elaborate a little bit, was about credentials and experience of the staff members. If we had asked the kids, I'm pretty sure the fun one probably would have been first. But just so to put in that framework of those responses, sort of what we got back in areas of strength and areas to work on. When I say that all areas rated positively, it's at rates of 65% or better. That means strongly agree or agree. We're 65% or better. And in the negative rating, mean anything less than neutral, nothing even reached 10% in any of the major categories. So areas of strength in the aggregate were the identification of safe, clean, and secure facilities and program calendars that did support work schedules. Areas for improvement, both from some comments and from their answers, were communicating with the parents about what the kids are doing in the program in terms of learning, and also uniformity of security procedures. You'll see that they thought the schools were safe facilities, but that the communication about security and that security being the same at each facility, which we ascertained from the comments, was not uniform. So we're going to go back and be working with them to just make sure that the expectations that everybody has for security are the same and in place appropriately. So for this year, we're going to work on that very point that I just mentioned. We're also going to talk and work with the vendors about staff stability, which is how do we work with them and encourage continuity of staffing, which is a challenge for these programs across the board. That's not to say it's a problem. It's gone successfully, but it's something that parents will identify as saying, I want to make sure that my child has the same person in place, the whole semester they're there. And also, we're going to look at programs access to buildings on non-attendance days as appropriate. So when there's not school, when is it appropriate and possible to do that without impinging on something that is going on in the school but it's not student-based, and when there aren't other operations going on at the school.
Like weather days, right?
Like weather days. Yes, that's an interesting problem right now, too.
Right.
The YMCA, just a little caveat, usually during these types of weather days opens up. Today was the first day they had not opened up in the memory of the director of this program that I work with. So the Y was not open as a warming center for people. It was a very rare instance. So. What we'll do next is we're going to review specific feedback with the principals. So we'll review what I've just gone over with you, but also then anything related that came up about their site. YMCA and Champions are both going to come to either a district leadership team meeting or to a EC5 principals meeting and just recap what they're doing, and so that the principals get it from that perspective. And then the principals will go ahead and look at that feedback they've been given, talk to their families, and listen to these presentations and make any recommendations to us regarding improvement in programming or change in programming for the following year, and the goal is to have that done before spring break. All right. Any questions? Yes.
At BB and Ranch View, does the Y have a morning program there?
That's where Champions is?
But they only offer after school.
Yeah, they only have enrollment right now for after school, I believe.
Okay, so if they had enrollment for morning, would they be open?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So I wasn't aware of that. And then so now we're using 2 vendors. And the second one, Champions, was a pilot program. Is it just going to continue as a pilot? Will it stay the same? I mean, how will that evolve?
So as I said on the last slide, we're going to review all the feedback with the principals and go over it and look to see if they have any recommendations. And if they feel they want to continue, then we'll continue. If they feel that it's better to make a change, they'll make a change. And that will go across the board, whether it's a Y or the Champions.
Okay. And then when you talked about, so scholarship or reduced tuition available upon inquiry. So with the Y, that's part of their mission, and that's what they do. And then I remembered with Champions, they offered like a kind of a pot that was available to draw from.
That's correct.
Is that being drawn from? What happened?
I'm not sure if any's been drawn from. I don't have the data, but I know that the site director or the area director, Ms. Zeman, has met on more than one occasion with social workers at both the sites to ascertain whether or not any of the children in those programs have need, would qualify, and then has followed up. And so far, I'm not aware that anybody has followed up on that.
And is like the pot, do you know, and I didn't ask you these questions before, so I feel like I'm putting you on the spot. But is the pot good system-wide or just at that school? Because we have schools that are more needy than other schools.
The pot for Champions is good at either Champion school.
Okay.
Okay, so yeah. And we haven't really determined what we would do at the end with what's left over.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Kind of piggybacking on Susan's comment, is cost a big concern, or maybe that's something that in these collaboration efforts with the principals and the K-5 group you're going to, is our dollars...
Cost to the families?
Cost to the families. Both programs are pretty competitive. Is that a big concern to these families that are there, or is this kind
It
of...
didn't come up in the factors that we asked for about, no.
Well, I'm really looking forward to the principals' input. I mean, they're the ones in the building. They see it. Parents usually pick up the kids, and they have about a 2-minute exposure. So, really looking forward to that. I am glad to see your emphasis on security. As you know, as the board may not know, Kane invited me out to visit 2 of the programs, and one of them was locked down, so to speak. You really had to work to get in the building. And the other one, he was in the principal's office, and I'm certainly not going to mention the building. And I kind of wandered in and was looking for him. I couldn't get into the school, so I couldn't get to the principal's office, but I certainly had access to the area the kids were in, unsupervised, for quite a few minutes.
You were unsupervised.
I was
The kids were
unsupervised.
supervised. So.
So, I do. And I just want to say I applaud the emphasis on uniform security procedures, because obviously there was a difference between at least the 2 schools I saw. So,
Sure.
great job.
Yeah, and just on the security, one of the things that's come up is that because where the program is in each given school,
Yeah.
the
Each one's
access
unique,
issues
yeah.
become completely different. So,
Any questions? Awesome. Thank you so much.
okay, thank you.
And I do not have a report this evening, but thank anyone. Any other board reports?
Just reminding you, on January 25th is Yucks for Youth coming up. And get your tickets. They're $50 until the 15th, and then they go up to $60.
Great evening.
So,
Good
yep.
call. Thank you. If I could ask someone to entertain a motion for the consent agenda.
I move approval of the consent agenda as presented.
Second.
We have a motion and a second for the consent agenda. Ms. Bell?
Romberg,
Yes.
Yench,
Aye.
Fitzgerald, Friday?
Yes.
Wanke? Yes. Price?
Yes.
Fielden?
Yes.
Motion carries. Thank you. Okay, we have a couple of items tonight for a discussion without action that will be back on our calendar for our second meeting in January. And the first one, item 8.01, literary resources for grades 1 through 8.
Our learning services team has been quite busy over the past couple of years prepping for this presentation this evening for the instructional resource materials that they are requesting for K-5 and grades 6 through 8. So our Chief Academic Officer, Jen Hester, and Director of Curriculum, Jane Willard, will present this information to you.
And I'm just going to be very brief before I turn this over to Mrs. Willard. But I just wanted to reiterate that this has been an extensive process that really involved, a lot of times a lot of vendors come to us asking for us to look at and adopt resources. And this was an extensive process where we actually sought to bring the vendors into us. And Jane's going to share a lot of that information with you.
Good evening. I'm going to wait for Lynn to pull this up. It's not on here. She has it. Mm-hmm.
No, it's on the. It was
Yeah,
sent for
we
the
sent it. Mm-hmm. Okay.
If you want to go ahead and just begin with kind of the outcomes for whatever your
Yes.
first couple slides are. So.
Tonight, as many of you recall, last March, the district curriculum process, along with our K-12 literacy curriculum, was presented to the Board of Education for approval of implementation. Tonight, I'm here to present the first phase of the recommended resources for literacy that will support student learning and teacher efficacy in grades 1 through 8. The outcomes for tonight's presentation are to review the process the literacy curriculum teams engaged in as I identified resources to support the literacy curriculum and to present the recommended resources for Board of Education approval. Here it comes. Okay, all right. Yeah, I want to see the timeline. Lynn, I'll take you to the third slide, please. The literacy curriculum work began in January 2012. During phase 1 of the literacy curriculum team review, they reviewed the newly adopted English Language Arts Common Core state standards. They finalized the district literacy philosophy, and they also created curriculum year-long maps. Phase 2 of this process consisted of creating grade-level maps and identifying possible resources to support the written curriculum. The literacy curriculum team is currently in stage 3 of the curriculum process. This year, our teams have engaged in professional learning, will create grade-level benchmark assessments, and have made final recommendations for your approval. At the beginning of the 2014-15 school year, we will begin phase 4 of the curriculum process, which will be full implementation of the literacy for 1st through 8th grade students. Next slide, please. We began this resource identification process by creating criteria based on the Common Core publishers' recommendations and our own teacher feedback and the new Common Core state standards. We carefully considered each Common Core strand: reading, writing, speaking and listening, and also language. A request for quote was created based on this criteria, and it was also sent out to all publishers. Publishers responded to our proposal and sent materials that aligned to our district's needs that were communicated through the request for quote proposal and documentation. A subcommittee of teachers then reviewed all of the resources using an evaluation tool that was based on Common Core and best practices in the literacy instruction. The team selected the top choices in each Common Core, and the entire literacy curriculum team had the opportunity to hear from each publisher and then evaluated these resources using a similar evaluation tool. Our teams field tested these materials, gathered feedback from their peers, and came to consensus on the resources that are being recommended this evening. Next slide, please. When the teams reviewed the resources, they used a very comprehensive evaluation tool. Within this tool, there were several components that were considered as criteria. This is a quick look at the criteria components that we use to determine the resources that best met our needs. We did much more detail in, these were the categories, and then underneath we had specific criteria. We felt the tool was very comprehensive and considered not only the standards, but also what was relevant and necessary for the learning of all students. Next slide, please. As the committee selected resources, they also focused on how these resources support the classroom instructional model. The gradual release of responsibility model of instruction suggests that the cognitive load of responsibility should shift slowly and purposefully from teacher as model to joint responsibility to independent practice and application by the learner. The recommended resources included content that teachers will utilize as they plan instruction. Also, they will have content that they will share and model with students, and also content that students then can access independently. Next slide, please. This slide represents the resources that are being recommended tonight. Many of these resources support learning in more than one of the strands that is outlined by the Common Core state standards. For example, in junior high, the Perfection Learning resource is an anthology of short texts that teachers can use in reading, but they can also use in writing. It can be paired with novels. It can also be paired with online digital content that the teacher has selected. It can also, or many of these resources support teachers in creating content that can be shared digitally, but also in a traditional format. Recall when Roger and Melissa Hampton, who is the Director of Professional Learning, previously talked about transforming student learning. One piece that was presented was the current content being accessed in classrooms and also the future state of how we want to access content. They discussed having digital resources readily available and multiple resources of information, which can be in the form of print and also in digital content. Utilizing the content in a meaningful context, whether print or digital, is what will transform learning of students. All of the recommended resources this evening provide students with a rich content and experience that supports student learning. A detailed description of all of these resources will be found in board docs for your. Next slide, please. What's coming next? Junior high. Our 6-8 team is still in the process of evaluating some resources in the area of writing and also language. They are also finalizing their extended text selections. These resources will be presented to you, the Board of Education, in March for your approval. Next slide, please. Any questions? Yes.
The books that we used to have, are you still using some of those?
We will still be using some of those. Our team right now, as they have been utilizing these new materials, have been going through and saying what is still relevant and necessary for students in our new curriculum, and then what are some other things that we no longer will be accessing.
Okay. And the only thing that surprised me on the whole list was the shipping costs. Because I know when I order from Amazon, it's free.
Yes. Well, actually, that shipping cost, most of our vendors are giving us free. And normally when we order any sort of material, it can be from a 6 to 8% on anything that's sent, even when we use maybe like an Amazon. Mm-hmm. But right now, we have one of our largest vendors that we're using in K-5, and they are waiving all of our shipping. So that shipping...
It's still going to be $18,000 after
they've already waived it. Mm-hmm. So right now, normally on all of our resource, we would pay an 6 to 8% on our resources. So right now, as we're looking at this, it actually is a cost savings in shipping.
Gosh, that's...
Mm-hmm. It's amazing what they charge in shipping. That's something that we negotiate always with our vendors, but that's one of the hardest things to write down.
I almost fell off my chair when I saw that.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay.
So on your timeline, in 2012 you created the K-12 literacy philosophy. Are we currently doing high school and kindergartens already implemented, right? That's why it's not on this timeline?
Right. They were
Okay.
on more of an accelerated timeline, and so
right.
they were fully implemented this year, kindergarten, English
Right.
1, 2, and 3.
Okay, I was just surprised to not see it on the timeline, so I thought I'd make sure and I do remember that it was implemented. I was just trying to see where it fit.
Right,
Thank
and
you.
we brought those resources then last
Right.
March.
Okay.
Susan?
I love the self-directed element, and this is what we want, and sending out the request for proposals. And you said, now, is this the first time we've done this?
Yes.
Have publishers experienced this from other districts?
They were surprised. We were one of the first, and I think, and they expected it. They definitely know that we want to customize our resources, and so this helped us. Instead of taking a comprehensive reading program sent by Pearson, let's say, for example, with creating this request, they knew and could identify exactly what our needs were. Instead of sending just one comprehensive basal resource, we really made them go through what their resources are that would meet the needs of our district.
How did they respond to it? What feedback did you get from them?
It was difficult for them because many of the publishers do packages. They do very large packages that their reading program, and it also includes a writing program. So it made them think differently about customizing for districts, and some of the districts then went forward and did individually customize what we wanted. For example, one of our school-wide is giving us text sets. Well, we went back and said, well, we didn't really like this text. Could you give us can you look at another selection? And they have bent over backwards for us as they have been and customized all their text sets based on our teacher feedback.
So this is one of those wonderful things that sounds, it sounds like it has an opportunity to be revolutionary, certainly. Have you published our experience or thought about publishing this experience in professional journals about what that's
I
process?
haven't, and it could be something. I mean, we are very proud of the rigorous evaluation process that we've gone through. I've met with other districts. They've called and said, I've heard you went through this rigorous evaluation process. Can you share? And so we've done that and collaborated with districts, surrounding districts. But I think we are very proud of the way that we handled our resource evaluation process. So we haven't thought of it, but it could be something that we do.
I think it's just extraordinary, and congratulations and thank you for the amount of work that you went into it.
Our teachers are definitely the ones to thank as well.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you so much.
All right.
It's really interesting. Thanks. And very popular, what's next? Very popular topic, what's next? Might be the most popular topic in the district, and that's the calendar and reaffirming the calendar criteria. And truly, this is a wonderful way to go about it. I think when Dan joined us as superintendent, he said, maybe we just, we go through all the criteria, get everyone to believe, and then we'll come back and talk to you about it. So,
Well,
how
that
about
being
that?
said, I couldn't have been happier when I handed this assignment off to Mr. Osborne, and like it was with Dr. Hawkins last year. But in Kane, there's not much to speak to right now, really, other than you've been provided with a draft memo from Kane regarding the beginning of the process for drafting the 2015-2016 tentative school year calendar. And what he's provided for you is a review of the calendar criteria direction that the Board of Education has given previously regarding the construction of the calendar, the 3 points, the balanced semesters, with the difference in number of days between the semesters to be less than the equivalent of 8 full days of student attendance, finals for high school students before the winter break, and a start date as late as possible in August that those others that are accomplished. So, it's for discussion tonight. Kane can now take a minute and talk a little bit about process and next steps.
Sure. I didn't understand the giggling when they said I had won something. So what will happen next is the calendar committee is actually going to meet this Wednesday. And if the criteria are confirmed, then we'll apply those criteria to the 15-16 calendar and start with a draft there, and make sure that all the criteria are met, and then that, frankly, instruction is maximized through the calendar that we bring back for consideration by the board. There are lots of factors to consider, but that's always the paramount one. And so it will start off by looking very much like the calendars have for the last couple of years, which have applied these criteria. And then based, I believe, on the January 21st board meeting, will be discussion without action. And if there's any feedback on that specific calendar, the calendar committee then will consider that also and make any adjustments necessary and bring back any revisions to the subsequent board meeting.
There's a couple criteria that seem to be missing or that we've talked about, or maybe you just treat them as an obvious thing, but
Okay.
it's the 2 full weeks at Christmas.
Okay.
And then like the non-straggler days. So like that we wouldn't plan to end school on a Monday. So we wouldn't, things like that. So that those are the
Yeah, there are some other considerations that go into
Okay.
it. What we really like to call out here are those other things that are kind of have some movement to them.
I love the calendar.
That impact the start and the end date, essentially. But Kane and his committee will use recommendations for the DuPage ROE,
Right.
ensuring that we meet ISBE requirements, collective bargaining agreements, and all of those things.
Okay.
So I would just ask that when we get the new calendar presented, will you give us the split between the semesters? Because
Sure.
Okay,
I
great.
can have a
Thank you.
day count on the calendar.
Great, thank you.
However, is, and we ran into this at some point, that some of the days in the spring are test days, so they're not curriculum days. So you may want to differentiate between curriculum days, teaching days, and testing days.
Sure, I can do that.
Because that helps, because there can be a couple days difference, and it looks more extreme than it is, because those aren't teaching days.
It's true.
And a question, and I didn't go back to the last year criteria. 8 was our magic number. It seemed a little high to me. 8, but that was our magic number. Okay, so be it. So be it. The other
That's 8 full days, but
The equivalent of-
all days, that includes those.
half day.
No, that includes those days that's the whole count. So when I say that there's a difference between testing days and
It would
teaching
take
days,
yes.
that 8 is the whole difference.
The whole.
Well, we got to find the words for this, isn't it? So it's not necessarily 8 if you're counting teaching days.
I don't know. I'll wait and watch
it
at
was-
the end of the
It's
month.
8 calendar days.
It's
If you
It's
count
8 for the high
teaching days,
school.
it's like 3
Yeah.
or 2.
We'll
teaching
use
days.
this and bring forward the draft calendar, and we'll have our conversation.
Absolutely confusing as possible.
Right. Recall there. To say that we can't wait to see this draft calendar, but truly, the delineation of the teaching days and the testing days are really huge, and I think that's what makes that 8 look a lot different. So, thank you so much, and I'm grateful that I'm grateful this calendar's in capable hands. So, Dan's even more grateful. Yeah, Dan's even more grateful. Okay, doke. Next. Topic tonight is the attendance area of the new neighborhood area assignment Arbor Trails.
We have been aware of and anticipated the addition of the Arbor Trail subdivision to our school community for the past couple of years. At our last enrollment capacity study, the area was designated as a TBD at a future date. Construction has begun, and construction is moving along very well, and we anticipate receiving students later this spring. So our operations department, under the direction of Kane Osborne, has prepared a recommendation for student attendance for the individuals in that area. So I will let Kane and Kitty, if necessary, and Bob, if necessary, speak to this.
And I would point out that there is, along with the calendar, as much fun as looking at a grid code map with Bob and Kitty, which we've done quite a bit of. But
You're just having so much fun.
hopefully the recommendation and the visual I've put in there is some help in the recommendation. But this area had previously been designated as TBD by the board, and so this just ends that designation and assigns it a grid code based on what you can see there in the map.
The only clarification I would make to the map is that the location of the actual development is in the upper left-hand corner of that grid code that's there. we're not admitting Benedictine students into Steeple Run. So it's essentially between Benedictine Parkway and Benedictine Drive, just off of Maple there on the, what is that, the northwest corner, northeast between there? The northwest corner of what we
northwest
see.
corner of
Yep.
that grid code would be where Arbor Trails is located and currently being built up. Superintendent Bridges mentioned this. We anticipate probably 9 families before the end of the semester, if I'm not mistaken, are scheduled to be closed and moved into those homes.
So we'll answer any questions that you have.
I have a question. I know that this neighborhood is just south of Maple. Maple, 55th, Chicago Avenue, whatever they call it, all different things. I'm sorry. It's south. The neighborhood south. The school's north. I said north. I'm sorry. The school is the neighborhood is south of Maple. The school is north.
Correct.
I know there's different hazard levels of streets. Will these elementary students? I'm not sure you have an answer to this yet. Will those elementary students be bused across the street, or will they be walkers with a crossing guard?
Ms. Ryan's been communicating with transportation. She can go ahead and give us an update.
Thank you, Mr. Osborne. At this time, it looks as if they're going to be bused, but we just want to make sure that we're applying the same criteria to all neighborhoods and all streets. So we are reevaluating that actual location.
Great. That's what I was concerned with too. That same level of, you can see the school, but it doesn't mean it's safe to cross that
Right.
street, and to make sure we're
We currently
being consistent.
We currently bus students located on the corner of Napier
Correct.
and Chicago Maple
Correct.
in the condominiums right there.
We do, and so we want to make sure that criteria, so it hasn't been reviewed in a long time, and so this is a good time to do that.
That's great. I know there's a stop and go light there, and that was always, different areas that, the intersections that plays into it as well. So yes, I would just want to make sure it's consistent with the other. Thank you. Any other comments or questions? Next agenda item, online and blended learning, consortium, phase 2.
Okay, as our Chief Academic Officer, Dr. Hester, and Director of Instructional Technology, John David Sun, come back forward. The presentation tonight will provide the Board of Education with updates on the consortium's work for Phase 1 and talk to you about recommended steps for moving into Phase 2. So I'll turn it over to Dr. Hester to begin.
All right, hello again. The outcomes for tonight's presentation are to understand the key elements from Phase 1 of our work with the Online and Blended Learning Consortium, and to provide the board with a detailed understanding of the next steps for Phase 2 of the work. It would be helpful for tonight's presentation if you have your PowerPoint ready, and then also the strategic plan, which provides a lot more detail. And just a quick word before I go on. In the plan, you'll see the acronym ILCO, which stands for Illinois Consortium of Online and Blended Learning. That is actually not an official name yet. That was really just a place filler, and there's been a lot of collaboration and discussion about a name. So just an interesting thing as we move forward. In September, I provided the board with information about our intention to enter into planning with 4 other districts to develop a strategic plan to expand our current online options and the blended learning that we provide. The consortium's objective was to design a collaborative, high-quality online and blended program that would expand educational options for students in all of the cooperating districts. You'll see the names of the districts, the 5 districts who participated in Phase 1 planning on the screen. Working with the leaders of these districts has really been a pleasure, and it has been a wonderful experience. We've had opportunities to share ideas about online and blended learning, to learn together, but also we've also had opportunities and have had discussions about Common Core implementation, about STEM learning, about report card implementation and planning, and then also with some of the district's instructional coaching. So I really think that no matter who might choose to move forward with Phase 2, that we have really benefited from some deep conversations with the other districts. John David and I would like to take this opportunity to thank the districts for their partnership and for stretching our thinking as we've been able to plan together, to work together, and learn together. And I would just like to recognize that the Chief Academic Officer from Indian Prairie 204, Mrs. Kathy Duncan, is here this evening, and then also her colleague, Dr. Stacy Gonzalez, who is the Director of Instructional Technology for Indian Prairie. So just wanted to recognize that they came out in the bitter cold this evening to show us support. The 5 districts met every 2 weeks to develop the strategic plan, mainly through online meetings, but we also had some on-site meetings. We modeled blended learning by working both synchronously and asynchronously through a project management application entitled Basecamp. Those meetings began in September, and then they ended in December, and all of the meetings focused on the consortium's objective. Phase 1 was facilitated by Evergreen Educational Group. Evergreen is a national expert in the field of online and blended learning. We selected Evergreen as a consultant because of what they do and then also because of the way they do it. So they provide strategic planning with deep content knowledge. They don't benefit from the content that we will eventually decide to purchase. They don't benefit from any of the courses that we select, from the learning management systems or for the professional learning. But rather, they're able to provide that unbiased service of helping us do the strategic planning. But we also went with Evergreen because their goal is to help the districts that they work with become independent at offering online and blending options for their students. During Phase 1, we considered many key issues about online and blended learning to develop guiding principles for our consortium. We developed a strategic plan. As you probably noticed from reading the plan, it provides a lot of specific detail about the initial implementation for the fall of 2014, focusing on online learning for high school students. The vision and the goals provide more general information and some of the information about the long-term plan that include grades K through 12. And then I think you'll see, too, that we start with online learning and then move to both online and blended for other grade levels. All consortium members engaged in professional reading. Many attended a national conference on online and blended learning, and all have attended online meetings with other consortia leaders. So basically 2 other organizations that have an online consortium. We also developed an implementation schedule for the short-term vision and then looked at some long-term plans. Some of the major benefits of participating in the consortium that we wanted to highlight is that I think as a district for 203, we've really solidified our understanding of the benefits of the online learning for our students. We've also really thought through that online and blended learning provides an opportunity for our teachers to access different learning modalities for students, to provide our students with choices that they may not have or as many choices as they have now. It provides us with an ability to further differentiate learning. We also think it helps with some of the goals that came out in Future Focus of college and career readiness, but then also making sure that we don't just wait to high school to give our students more of an experience with that online. We learned that the initial investment that we hope to make in the consortium should provide us with some scalability in the future. Although we won't see cost benefits immediately with joining with other districts, as a consortium would get off the ground, we should benefit in the amount of courses that we're able to provide, in the amount of content that we're not only able to access, but the ability to access, but actually purchase and then own and use as we see fit. And that we should also benefit from continued professional learning and collaboration. Okay. And now I'm going to turn it over to John David, who is going to really take a look at the plan.
Thanks, Dr. Hester. The next 2 slides, we're going to take a dive into the consortium strategic plan. If you look at the bottom of this slide, the 3 items that are on this slide are referenced from page 5 of the strategic plan. If you have that pulled up on your laptops from board docs, and if you want to reference some of these items. We wanted to call out some of these key components that were developed collaboratively in the strategic plan because we believe these are some of the key elements of the work that was done by the consortium. One of the first areas that we focus on is teachers, and when we take a look at teachers that would be identified to teach courses within the consortium, all teachers would come from member school districts within the consortium. Teachers that would teach these courses would be teachers within member school districts within the consortium. If we did come across an instance where a teacher was not available from one of those school districts within the consortium, then the consortium would go through the process of identifying a teacher that met those certification requirements and was also highly qualified by the state of Illinois. It's also important to note that, that teachers would remain employees of their district. If they were hired to teach a course that the consortium provides, they would still remain employees of their school district. They would be governed by policies and guidelines set forth by their local boards of education. They still remain employees of their school district. When we take a look at the technology components of the strategic plan, there's a couple of key elements that stand out. The first would be the selection of a learning management system. We'll talk a little bit about this in more detail, but the consortium would go through a process of evaluating and selecting a learning management system in order for us to be able to provide content and collaboration space for these courses to be provided for our students and teachers. One of the key components of that also that the consortium will provide is some guidelines and expectations for how students and teachers will communicate and collaborate with each other. The strategic plan also lays out that member districts have the ability to choose whether to provide devices for students, and this was left up to each individual district depending upon need, depending upon the students that were participating in the courses, of whether to provide technology devices to those students. And some of that may depend upon whether the students are taking the courses at home or whether they're taking some of those courses within the school location itself. The next area that we talk about is students, and kind of piggybacking off that last item is location. Each member district will have the choice as to determine where students will take courses. A member district may choose to allow students to take the course within the physical school day and allocate a physical space as well as some devices for him or her to do that. Or they may choose that the student has the ability to take that course outside of the normal school day, can take that course at home using a technology device that they already have or that the school district provides them. As far as enrollment goes, students from each member district will have the opportunity to enroll in courses based on procedures that the district creates for its own students. The consortium is only going to create guidelines and recommendations for how districts would enroll students, but each district is going to come up with those procedures. The items that you see on this page are referenced from pages 6 and 8 in the strategic plan. The first area that we take a look at are the courses. These are courses that the member districts agreed upon were of some of the highest need. When we took a look at, as Dr. Hester referenced, looking at our short-term need and looking at some of our high school students and some of the opportunities that we have there, these were all courses that the 5 member districts agreed upon were some of our immediate needs and some of our best opportunities for students to be successful right now. You can see those courses listed up there. The second main item that's on this page here has to do with the number of seats that would be available. And the way seats are allocated according to the strategic plan are proportional based upon our enrollment. And when you look at courses that would be available, it was determined that each course would have a maximum number of seats of 26 students. And when you did the math based on that, there were a total number of seats that were determined, and then that was divided by the enrollment, total enrollment from each of those districts. District 203 would have 104 seats available in the fall of 2004. 104 seats doesn't necessarily mean 104 students. We could have one individual student that chooses maybe to take one section of Algebra 1 online, one section of U.S. History online, and that would count for 2 of those 104 seats. One of the things Dr. Hester talked about was, especially in her work in September, is as we as a district go through phase 1, we would come back to you and recommend moving forward into phase 2. We want to highlight some of the key elements here that would take place in phase 2 in order for us to continue to move forward. One of the first things that would take place would be school board approval, and we would look to sign a second intergovernmental agreement by those districts that choose to continue to move forward with this work. If you remember, we signed a first intergovernmental agreement between those 5 districts, and that was only moving us into phase 1, moving us through the end of phase 1. We're currently working on with a good faith agreement with Evergreen for the month of January right now, as the districts do their board presentations and determine who's moving forward with phase 2 work. One of the next pieces of phase 2 will be the development of a curriculum adoption process and the selection of curriculum and content. We'll use a process very much like we would use for the learning management system, where we would solicit an RFQ or an RFP. We would look at vendors that are available, do some vendor demos, and we as a district would have key district leaders, representatives from our high school and from our curriculum and instruction department that would be a part of that process, along with members from other districts that would look at content providers that are out there and determine and help make a recommendation for the consortium of the content and the curriculum that would be utilized. We would also look to develop teaching expectations for consortium courses. We know that one of the things that we've learned in phase 1 is that teaching online courses is very different than teaching the face-to-face courses. And so it would be important that we outline what those teaching expectations look like for our teachers, how they interact, how they communicate, and how they work with students in that online space. Along with that, is going to be very important that we provide the right professional development for our teachers. Very, very few of our teachers have had the opportunity to facilitate and lead and offer courses in an online environment. So we know it's going to be important for us and for the consortium to provide the right professional development for them to be successful in that space. As I mentioned earlier, we'll go through the process of evaluation and determining a learning management system for the consortium courses. We'll likely look to leverage a process that we as a district have utilized in the past, and the consortium will go through the process of looking at learning management system providers that are out there and selecting the product that best meets the consortium's need. The consortium will go through the process of developing a job description for the director of the consortium, as well as the hiring process and the final selection of that director as well. We'll also develop a communication plan for all consortium stakeholders, communications that we can use internally with our staff, with our parents, but also communications that we can put outwardly facing into our community as well. And finally, we'll look to develop a program evaluation plan that will help us determine the overall success of the consortium. The next couple of slides that we want to take a look at are cost. And when we look at cost, they're actually broken down into 2 parts for us moving forward into phase 2. The first is an initial investment. And if you look in the strategic plan, each district that chooses to move forward is asked to put up an initial investment that's equal across the board. And that initial investment gets them an equal voice and an equal membership and an equal vote. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in just a minute. So there's costs that are a part of that initial investment. And there are also costs that are proportional. When we collaborated with Evergreen and looked at some of those costs that could be broken down and look a little bit different based upon the size of each district, some of those costs, such as professional development, our work with Evergreen, are actually based upon the size and the enrollments of the district. So those are proportional in nature. This slide shows you the cost as we would see for year 1 for District 203, as well as what we envision would be ongoing cost moving forward. I want to explain a little bit about what you see under year 1. If you look at those first 5 items, personnel, content, marketing, communications, the learning management system, and technology, those 5 items are all a part of the initial investment cost that we talk about. If you take those dollar amounts and include them with the last line item that says remaining funds from initial investment and add all of those items up, that is a total of the $85,000 that was mentioned in the strategic plan for each district's initial investment. That's how that $85,000, that's how that cost breaks down for us as a district in the first year. The second portion of the cost for us in the first year are the proportional cost. Those are those 2 items that you see there in the middle, the professional development as well as the professional services. Professional development is professional development services that we would be able to providing for our teachers. The professional services is the continuing work with Evergreen. That is their work in facilitating, providing the project management and the research moving us forward in phase 2. Adding all of those items up gives us a total cost for year 1 of about $108,000. When we look at our ongoing cost, we have made some assumptions that there will be some ongoing cost with personnel. We know there will be some ongoing cost with content as well. One of the things that we envision with content is that as this consortium moves forward, we could look to have other districts that join this moving forward from around the area, which could look, even though we may add courses and add more content, with other districts that could potentially join us in the future, that could be a cost that actually does come down as well. We know that the learning management system could and would be an ongoing cost for us. Some of these other items on here that you see that do not have an ongoing cost with them, as we've collaborated as an administrative team, those are costs that we envision that could become a part of regular run rate budgets, such as professional development and technology. The professional services is not an ongoing cost because, as Dr. Hester said, one of Evergreen's goals is to allow their districts and consortiums to become self-sustaining. And that's very important so that we know that the work that they provide us allows us as a consortium to move forward and be self-sustaining and not see that as an ongoing cost for us. So our next steps and our recommendation to move forward with Phase 2 is based upon some of these 3 key elements that you see here. The first is an equal voice in governance based on the equal initial investment from all participating districts. That's that $85,000 that I mentioned. The continued consulting services from Evergreen Education Group to facilitate the consortium work, and the hiring of a director for the consortium who will work closely with the administrators from each member districts and the Evergreen Education Group to continue the development of the consortium and eventually assume responsibility for day-to-day operations of the consortium. The last slide I have here is to give you an overview of where each of the districts are in sharing this information with their school boards as well. Wheaton-Warrenville actually shared some of this information in December before break with a subcommittee of their board and are giving a board presentation later this week. Indian Prairie and Canelan are scheduled to give their presentation next week, and Batavia their initial presentation at the end of the month. Questions?
I got a question. So it's a great, very good information. And I'm excited about online learning just in general, just because of the last company that was in here that presented a program. Yours seems to be much more robust and meaningful. So the seats that are available, the 103 seats, will those increase at any time as the program develops, and what is the process for that to happen?
I think, yes, overall the goal is that we can increase and have more opportunity. In terms of the process for that to happen, we would have to, as the consortium moves on in planning, we would identify the needs for future courses. We would also identify needs for, and that's basically how we would start to generate the need for more seats. And then also look at attendance from those seats that were filled and requests. And then in addition to that, moving into thinking about where could we use this in our junior highs, and then obviously then adding seats at that level, and then utilizing the strategies of blended learning.
Does it more seats correlate to more staff and so forth, and would costs increase accordingly, or?
More staff, but more staff in terms of to teach those courses, but it doesn't mean that it's an increase in teachers. So basically, if you're adding, let's say, a section of, let's say we move to English 2 and it's not just for credit recovery purposes, it may be that in the course planning guide, students have the option of choosing English 2 face-to-face or English 2 in the online situation.
Okay.
So say, for example, our teacher is the one that's teaching government, for example. And so they're teaching for the consortium. Could we also have an internal class as well with that? I guess I'm looking for cost savings somewhere else. That's what I'm really, looking to possibly translate that into.
So we could do that, I would guess, if we wanted to take that on. But there are a couple things that I think we'd have to have an agreement from the consortium. One would be to access that content. And then also whether it's, ends up being the learning management system we have or another one. But the other thing, I guess a reason that I would want us to do that with caution is that our first initial attempts at this with the professional learning, we want to make sure that we have all the teachers identified and that we have the professional learning and we do it really thoroughly, and then we start to expand past that point.
So for one of the classes you have, don't we already have our own program for consumer economics?
Yes.
We do.
So what would that mean?
Well, right now we have our own program with our own curriculum that's
Which
been
is
developed.
an online program.
Yeah. So then, what we're doing now is looking at what content are we choosing as a consortium? So the content of that class could change.
So is there any cost savings anywhere else? I guess that's what I was just looking for. Because that's like a full-time teach. I mean,
right.
That's a middle of the...
I think that, so initial cost savings would be very small, and I think you should speak to this too, it would be more in professional learning. But I think that's what we're learning is that the cost savings will come later with scalability versus now.
Yeah. I think as we look down the road at long term, and especially if we look at providing more courses, one of the benefits of the consortium is as we look to purchase more content, if we're purchasing this as a consortium, we could look at cost savings from purchasing that content. If we look at the consortium expanding beyond who the original 5 are right now, there's obviously benefits down the road long term as we look to purchase content from there as well.
And could you maybe show me a day in the life of the student who's taking U.S. history and health, for example, online? What would their day change, or how would it look?
The way we've laid this out in the strategic plan is that's really up for each district to define. We as a district haven't defined that yet. That's one of the things that we'll do in collaborating with our high school administrators, our high school directors of student services. We'll talk about who our students are and what's the right environment for them. Are they taking those classes within the current school day, within the current school structure, or is the best learning opportunity for them maybe outside of the current school structure? So it's going to be something we decide as we move forward with phase 2.
Okay.
So to kind of piggyback off of Susan's questions, currently the courses that students take online are through other entities other than our consumer ed. And I know that the district still gives them credit towards graduation, but a different issue is that the NCAA doesn't always recognize all of those. So how have you touched into that area at all, and will they be recognized, and how does that work?
We've actually, I think because every district has experienced that, where you have to make sure that your courses are recognized, and a lot of that comes in with what you name your course. So we will have to do that immediately with the courses that we're looking at for in phase 2 planning. But that will have to be a part of that process for when John David mentioned the course approval and then the curriculum approval. We'll have to have that right in there, just like we do today with the courses that we offer.
Okay, and thank you so much for all your thorough information. It is a lot to digest. The teachers that are teaching it, is that going to be part of their regular load, or will it be in addition to, so if I was a full-time teacher, I'd be teaching 5 courses. If I was teaching a course with the consortium, would I be teaching 4 and then the consortium class, or how does that look for our teachers?
It would be if one of our teachers were teaching one of these online sections, then it would become a part of their regular teaching load. So they would teach their regular teaching load, and in lieu of teaching for a particular section, in lieu of teaching a face-to-face section, they would have the online sections. One of the things that we laid out in the strategic plan that was recommended from best practices and working with Evergreen and some of the other districts that they've worked with is that the teacher that teaches that online section is given that period, and that is their online teaching period. They use that time to participate in discussions with students, to place content in there. That is their online teaching period, so that would fall into their regular day.
Okay. And then for students, would that look, I know that you said you had sort of addressed that a little bit, but would that be true for students too? Like if they were taking, well, you haven't decided if they're going to be within the school day or out. Let's say that they're out of the school day. Would they be able to take like an overload in a sense then, like their full-time day and then do that in addition?
That's one of the things that we had some initial conversations before break with Mr. Ross and some of the high school administrators. That was one of the questions that high school administrators raised as well. That's something that we as a district are going to have to talk about and determine moving forward.
One question that I know came up quite a bit when we were going through this process with the other entity was teacher to student ratio. Has that been part of your concern?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. I was typing it as you were saying it, and okay. I think so. Okay, I think I have all my questions answered. Thank you.
Thank you for this document. I think it was very helpful, the strategic plan, particularly going through all the details of all the work that you've been doing and kind of your expectations. And it answered quite a few of my questions. I do have a couple more. I wondered, we currently have some students who are participating in online type learning, such as those at Ombudsman. And I was wondering, how do you expect this to interface with that? Will those students be potentially some of those seeds, or how do you expect that there to be some relationship there, or would that be totally different?
It really depends on the situation. I know one of the things with the phase 2 planning, even on our own, is John David and I are planning to visit some of, for Ombudsman, we're taking a look at Grad Point. We absolutely plan on working with Dr. Foley to look at what points is it appropriate for our students to take, and actually it's really a goal of matching the appropriate course and the appropriate instruction. So we'll look at those over time as we start to have things develop.
So it may be that some of our students who are already ongoing in programs that we have would replace, this would be sort of a transfer. They would replace some of those students, potentially.
Potentially some could replace, and in other cases not.
Right. Okay. When you were originally talking about the different technology areas, you talked a little bit about, like, for example, the blended learning. And I know that one of your hopes was to, like, for example, for a flipped classroom, have a menu of resources that would be available for current teachers that are teaching in the class to potentially add to what they're doing. Where is that in terms of this
So a
process?
couple of things. Throughout the learning that we've done, we've been able to learn a lot more about what blended learning is. But in addition to that, I think coupled with the work on online and blended, then the work that Roger has been doing with the device strategy is then taking a really careful look at what we currently have and being able to look at the situations where we do have blended learning happening. So I think it's always good when you can start from that appreciative stance of where we are and where we can go. So that's been an important phase of documenting. But then the other thing is there's been a clear goal with the consortium to make sure that blended learning and improving blended learning in our districts becomes a goal. But in the planning process with an implementation date of fall of 2014, the thing that we could do well to start off with was provide online learning in the high school. And there were many of us who that was very hard because we still we saw great opportunities that we could do immediately in our junior highs.
Definitely.
And just said, let's just do this really well and then move toward bigger implementation later.
Okay, so that's still on the docket for your work that you're planning to work towards.
Yes, and I think I went back through the plan again and really focused on those areas of the long-term goals, and that does highlight it some, but there's definitely a lot more energy around that than probably what comes through in that document.
Okay, good. So you do see that for part of the future, and it's interesting just in touring and looking at some of the types of learning that's going on now. It seems as if the efforts that we make to document and utilize those resources and make that publicly available for others. That could help some of the high school students too who are looking at remedial courses or course recovery, because I'm watching some of them working on things that are strictly reading and online. And for example, if you were to have that menu of already recorded lessons, potentially they could link into that as well and look at, oh, well, this time I don't have to do my math just from reading it. I can actually look at this particular thing that's already recorded from this teacher, et cetera. So it seems like that will be enriching to our students in a numerous ways. Another question, you mentioned just on a tiny bit on the slide about enrichment at the very bottom of the list. And in your document, you put in the idea of languages. So you had mentioned high school only right now, but would that be a potential, were you to look at language learning as an enrichment that you're looking at, would that be potentially something where you might be able to go forward in offering that farther down the chain, like to the junior highs or to the elementaries? I mean, I know you have K through 12 on there, and right now we're just looking at the 9 through 12, and then we're looking at junior high next. But that to me, when I saw that, I think you had mentioned Mandarin in the document, would that potentially be an area where that could be offered to a variety of different students?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's any course that we look at, and some of that content that we look at when we go through that process, as Dr. Hester was referring to, we'll want to take in that K-12 perspective, and we'll want to look at it both from the online and from the blended learning standpoint. So when our representatives from our district participate in that work for the consortium, it's going to be very important that they keep that K-12 perspective, that they look at how our elementary students, how our middle school students could benefit from that, and how our classroom teachers could incorporate that into blended learning within our current learning management system. That's going to be very important that we bring that to the table, and I know other districts will as well.
Well, it's when I was trying to picture it in my head of how you would put this in and substitute it for K through 12. I mean, for like K through 5 particularly, I wasn't quite sure. But the enrichment opportunities in the K through 5, that it seems like a real possibility. Okay, just my last question, and this is just something that stuck out to me when I was looking at your budget. What do you envision with regard to marketing? When you talked about the marketing communications, what does that mean?
One of the reasons that was in there this year as a single line item is because of the timing of the process this year. As we move forward with this, Dr. Hester referred to this earlier about a student may have an opportunity when they look at that course book to choose whether they take an English course, whether it's face-to-face or online. The timing of this process this year, the course books have been printed and they're already out. So it's a little bit different process. That's one of the reasons we've had some early conversations with high school administrators and the student services folks. So we realize that there may be some work that we have to do in advertising some of these courses because they're not a part of our regular process this year. We envision moving forward that becomes a part of that course book moving forward, and that's not
why
an
it's
ongoing
one time.
cost. Right.
Okay, thank you. That's it.
Excuse me. I think Jen answered some of this in response to Kristen. I just want to make sure because the 104 seats was bugging me, especially when we got into the blended learning. But what I'm hearing is the emphasis right now is pretty much all online. You guys are not ready for prime time on blended learning because that's going to throw the whole seat thing off, because if you have one teacher that's teaching a blended course, that could be 20, 25 kids at a pop. So you're talking about online only to start with, and blended is somewhere down the road?
Yeah, online to start with. And then if we think of blended like this instead of, so when we talk about the online learning, we have to talk about seats. If we would talk about any type of supplemental online learning, again, we'd have to talk about seats. But when we move to blended, one of the reasons you want a consortium, you want the scalability, is that you actually own the content, and then any teacher, a teacher teaching a face-to-face course, can pull pieces of that content to blend the learning. So that's exactly why the 104, because it pertains to the online.
And you keep on mentioning blended. What is the timeline? I heard you say it's not going to be this fall. What is the timeline you're looking at having materials available for some kind of blended use?
Well, we actually have some blended learning going on now. So to expand it, I would say to expand it every year. as we're able to get our students to use more web-based applications, as we're able to continue some of the uses that we have. But then also, if you start merging what we're doing now and our efforts that are going to continue with what the consortium's doing, then our teachers have more content to pull from. So I'm going to make an estimate here. We're not in phase 2. We haven't done the formal planning and moving on. But I would say that into next year, they would be able to start tapping other forms of content to pull into the classroom. But then by 15, 16, we should have a lot more to pull into what we do.
Okay. And that wouldn't necessarily count as seats per se?
No.
Okay,
no.
great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I just had a quick question. How was it decided? I understand this is on a consortium basis. If I look at these courses, and I understand we're in the high school model, these are all requirements, okay?
Mm-hmm.
There's no, so you think about the student that the student that takes the AP class, and I understand not everyone does, or takes the AP test and doesn't take the class. And this might be a great, this might be an opportunity for them. They don't need a lot of they don't need a lot of supervision. They can do a lot of independent learning. How did this group of classes bubble up to the top? Because of the true need, because of the requirements? I guess I'm answering my own question out loud, I guess.
Yeah, you're doing a good job. One of the exercises Evergreen had us do as a consortium is we were actually face-to-face with the districts, and we started identifying who were students in our district that we felt would benefit from online courses. And we started listing the different types of students that we looked at, and then we were asked to prioritize those and look at the ones that have the most immediate need. Who are the ones that we can make the most impact for looking at the fall of 2014? Once we identified those students, that's when the conversation then turned to the courses. So talking about who the students were, that came first, and then we looked at the courses. So that exercise kind of got us to the point of the courses that you see.
One additional question I had as I was reading through this, and I think Kristen or Don, this side of the room touched on a little bit, in terms of our alternate programming, whether it be the bridge program or whatever. I also think about the programming in the high school, the sophomore, junior, can't think of it now, Karen Canty teaches at North, I can't think of the name of it. The Academy. Those type of classes, everyone that's bought into this 203 wonderfulness gets to be a part of this or assigned to some of these seats, if appropriate, correct? Yes. Okay. Sounds good. Great material. Great. And I love the consortium side. I always think, boy, you learn a lot. As you said, Jen, you learn more than you ever thought you did going into this about all sorts of things. So, great. Thank you so much, and more to come. Yeah, great job. Thank you. Next, scheduled events are on there, and before my motion to adjourn, I want to thank everyone that doesn't live right here in the 6 or 7 or 8 zip codes in our town that has a little ways to travel. Thank you so much. Again, rescheduling was going to be more cumbersome than going ahead with this tonight. So without further ado, if I can have a motion to adjourn. A motion? To adjourn? Oh, Michael,
Second.
Michael. A motion and a second we have, Michael, to adjourn. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much, everyone. Drive safely.